So good morning, everyone. Morning. Oh my God, wake up. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wow, much better. Good morning to those who are watching us through the internet. So today, not so summer-ish. I don't know what is going on outside. God didn't decide to warm up Canada yet, but we'll get there. So we are very happy to have you guys here on this gloomy day to learn a little bit more. So the lecture for today is by our friend Rafael, and he's going to talk about the true courage. But before we do, as we always, Katarina is going to do the initial reading and prayer for us.
Good morning. The message is from the book Happy Life. And it says, keep up your courage as you struggle, no matter what the situation is. Some pathways are less difficult to travel, yet all pose a challenge. There is an assumption that if you work for the good of others, you yourself are exempt from obstacles and difficulties. That's a fallacy. People are the same everywhere. St. Vincent de Paul, who did so much for the poor, declared that they were very demanding and ungrateful. So, have courage always. Now let's close our eyes and connect our hearts and brains to the spirituality that's here with us today. Let's bring the sunshine to our hearts. I know it's gloomy outside, but we can make it warmer inside here. And let's keep in mind, bringing the theme of today, courage. Let's bring in mind we're never alone. We look outside, we see spring blooming, and we see all the little animals taking care of themselves, and somehow they all get through life, getting the food that they need, getting the shuttles, the shelters that they need. And the same happens to us. God, our spiritual friends, are always with us, and they guide us through life. So let's not forget we're never alone, and let's be brave and face all difficulties that come upon our ways, because they can only make us better. Let's keep the warmth in our hearts through the study of today, and let's keep it expanding through others here next to us, to all of our families and friends. And let's shine our hearts to Rafael, who's going to guide us today to the lessons we're going to keep in our hearts for the next week to come. Thank you, and so be it.
Hi guys, good morning.
Good morning.
Just turn on my tablet. Perfect. So today, the talk will be about true courage. And I don't mean for this to be a lecture. I don't think that I can give a lecture about courage, since I'm learning myself. What I intend here is to bring a reflection on the subject based on this wonderful doctrine and this extremely strong light that shine on us, that is the Spiritist doctrine. So when I was thinking and studying about courage, actually this is something that when we talk about, we remember several situations where we mention courage, or people say that we need. Courage is a virtue that society demands from us. We all need to have this virtue of courage. We all need to be courageous. The problem is that the true concept of courage has been distorted a long time ago. And because of this concept has been distorted, and even being distorted, we have to have it. And sometimes we don't. And this creates anxiety, restlessness. We feel unhappy. So my intention today is bring these lessons that we learn from Jesus, and that is brought to us again under the light of Spiritism, so then we can really understand what true courage is, and we can fight against those feelings of anxiety and restlessness, and understand what is the true courage, and what is the impact in our lives. So we were never alone. So we have received several missionaries and messengers that came to us throughout the existence of our civilization to teach us what courage is. But we know that we are stubborn, and it takes a long time for us to learn something. However, there's something very inspiring, which is that we were created by God with an upgrading function, which is even worse than the operating systems that we have today. You know, every now and then we have to do it. It is required an update. Sometimes every week we need to do an upgrade in our operating system. So the upgrading system, the function that we have within us is even worse than that, because it doesn't ask. There's no question. Do you want to do an update? No, it does it. And the difference is, it's always for better. It's because it's created by God. So by this analogy, what I want to say is, whether we want it or not, we are going to get better. We are going to improve, and we are going to learn. It doesn't matter if you decide. If you don't want to learn, if you don't want to get to the state of a pure spirit, you're going to get there anyway. It doesn't matter if you want it or not. You are going to get there. And together with this function of always evolving, always upgrading, God created several triggers, and one of the most powerful ones is pain. Pain. What does pain have to do with courage? Everything. Because we need courage to understand pain and to go through it even when we feel pain. So by this, I'm already giving some hints of what is the true courage. Is to understand something that may hurt, but you know that it's good for you. So you go through it. So, as an engineer or scientist, I always, when I want to understand a phenomenon or a machine or anything, any mechanism, I start from the beginning. When the machine is not working, or and I try to divide in steps of laws, and then I connect them, and then I get to a conclusion. So if you see my presentations here, I always start more or less in the same way. I start in the very beginning of our civilization and trying to understand what changed there to make us what we are today. So today is not different. We start in the dominion of instincts. It's not news that as in our evolution, we are created very simple and ignorant. And we walk our way through the kingdoms of nature. So when we were in the animal kingdom, and to differentiate, we were not spirits at that time. The nomenclature from the Spirit's book is intelligent principle. So we have the principle of intelligence, but we didn't have a full-time intelligence. We had a part-time intelligence. So it comes and goes. It comes and you have a spark, and then you solve a problem, and then it goes away again. And you lose. We don't have self-conscience. The lion doesn't know that it is a lion. Otherwise, it would make something for his life to be better. That's the difference. We know what we are. We are self-conscious. So before that, when we were intelligent principles in the animal kingdom, there were two main things that drove our existence: hunger and fear. And since we were in the dominion of instincts, we would react, not act, we would react to those two feelings. If I'm hungry, I need to eat. And then by instinct, I know what I have to eat. If I'm a hunter, like a lion, I need to hunt a gazelle or a buffalo or another animal. And because I'm big, normally the animals are big too. So, and they're not going to go willing into my mouth. So I have to hunt. And the animal, gazelle, would feel fear and will react too. I have to run. And if I'm caught, I will fight with everything I have because I don't want to be eaten. So in those two situations, there is a boost of power in the body. So the body produces more power than normally produces in daily life. So it transfers more energy to the limbs. The energy of the body is the same, but the power is more. So we have the same energy and we are consuming at a particular rate, but at that moment we transfer everything we have to our limbs. That's why when the moment is over, we collapse. We feel really, really tired. So lions or lionesses, which are the ones who hunt, they sleep the whole day. And then they wake up and they hunt and then they go back to sleep. So this boost of power that is pumped into our limbs, it's what Hamed, the spirit Hamed, in the book Changing Attitudes, called rage. When we feel rage, it's this boost of power that we need to do something. I either need to fight to eat, because it's not easy to kill a big animal. So they feel adrenaline too. They feel fear too. But if they don't do it, they're going to starve. So I either have to use this anger to fight to eat, to attack, or to protect myself, or to run. But it's the same energy. It's the same energy that we have. So time passed, and we start going from one species to the next, and we start learning until we reach a position where the next step is to become a spirit. And then we are taking, Emmanuel tells us in the book On the Way to the Light, that we are taking, so we finally discarnate as an animal, and we are taken to the spiritual world, and we stay there for some time where work is done on us, so that we can finally receive a human-like body, or a mutation of an ape. If we look from the point of view of Earth, what you see is a mutation that it's a positive step on the evolution. So it is a mutation that is beneficial for the species, and it creates a new species. But we know from Emmanuel's teachings that it's a lot of work in the spiritual plane for us to come back as a human. So we'll never find a missing link between animals and man, because as Emmanuel said, there is no descent from the trees. The evolutionary theory today is that climate change drove the trees, so we were all apes, and the trees were farther apart because of the change in the climate. So we could not just jump from one to the next. We had to come down, walk, and climb the next tree, because there was no food enough in one tree. And in this walk, there was predators, so we need to learn to run, and we could not run in four legs anymore, because we needed our hands for tools. So then it became what we are today. So that's what one branch of evolutionary study tells us. And Emmanuel tells it. It says on the way to the light, I apologize to the naturalists, but there was never a descent from the trees. So he's saying that this jump was not made on Earth. But in any case, we became humans. And as humans, we learned that if we live all together, it's much easier to survive. Instead of me doing everything, I live in a group and then I divide. So you are stronger than me. So you stay and you protect. You are in charge of protection. And I cannot do anything. I'm not good in throwing spears. I'm not good in making spears. I can cook. So I'll cook. And the first nerd was born. My ancestor. So, but we need all those professions. So we learned that because we became self-conscious. I see myself. I know my weaknesses and my strength. So let's divide. You do this, I do that. We are self-conscious. And then we start living in society. With very well-defined duties. However, even living in society at that time, we still needed to eat. So there was still situations that were very dangerous. Very dangerous. So the groups, the strongest, they would form a class of workers that we call the hunters. And those hunters, they were in charge of getting food for the village. And at that time, they didn't have Costco or Walmart. So they had to go and hunt. And the animals, they were not small animals, they were big. And so then they saw, well, if I cannot hunt that animal with my hands. I need to do something different. So then they learned to do spears and then bow and arrow. But at that particular moment, it was the first time that the concept of courage started to be developed. Because when we are animals, and we are not self-conscious, we react on instinct. We feel fear, and we react to fear. But we don't think that by doing this or that, we're going to die, or we're going to suffer. We don't think about that. When we are humans, and we know, we understand that if I'm wounded in a serious way, I will cease to interact. I will collapse on the floor and stay there. They didn't understand what exactly was death, but they knew. I saw my friend or my colleague to be, he was wounded on a hunt, and he just collapsed on the floor, and he stayed there as any other carcass that I see around. So then I don't want to be dead, but I need to hunt. So that's when courage starts. I do something, I feel fear, but I do something anyway in spite of the fear. I overcome fear by intelligence. Only humans can do that. Only us can do that. So that's where it was the very beginning of the concept of courage. And when we started understanding that as a virtue, because you are afraid of something, but that something is necessary. It's necessary. You have to do it. So you have to face your fears and do it anyway. But we continue developing as a civilization. And the problem is that the situation started changing. The world started to change. And we became more powerful as a civilization. We learned agriculture. We learned to sow and harvest vegetables. So we were not so dependent on hunting big creatures. We could live on corn, on carrots. Of course, we still need the protein, but it's not as we can eat other things. We start dividing, so we don't have to hunt every single day. And we start, but the thing is, when we became humans, there are two things that we created, that we developed. This is said in the chapter 17 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. All the suffering, I'm sure you guys will remember that, all the sufferings that we go through in life, everything, all the vices, they are based on two things. Two things. The first one, I'll say only the initials. I know that you guys are going to remember. It starts with S and ends with elfishness. Selfishness. So that's one, selfishness. And the second one?
Pride.
Pride. So that's the thing. We became self-conscious. We developed courage. And then I start looking at myself, oh, I build my body. I'm part of the class. So let's say if I'm a hunter. I'm part of the class of the strongest people in the village. So I'm better. That's when it came together. I'm better. So why should I care about everybody else? They are weak. I should care about myself because I'm better. Selfishness and pride. It starts in the very beginning as two faces of the same virus, the same psychological virus that create a disease in our souls. And this disease, it's still with us. And one of the symptoms of this disease is violence. Violence. Violence is the misplacement of the energy that we develop in the animal kingdom of rage, of anger. It's when the situation's changed and we still want to use that energy, but we don't know where to use. Then we start distorting the concept of courage. Courage was always facing your fears. But some fears are not necessary. So if you're afraid of something, it doesn't mean that you have to face that something. I'm afraid of jumping off of the CN tower. I'm terrified. I went there once, I'm never going back. Even taking the elevator. Terrified. Does it mean that I have to go up there and jump? No, that's not courage. That's stupidity. And ignorance, because I know that our bodies, it's are gifts that were given to us, and we have to take care of our bodies. So if I destroy my body, I have to pay. I forgot the term now. I would make an analogy with a car, but I forgot the term. So we have to return it. That's what I mean. A lease. We have to return it. If I destroy, I have to pay for it. So that is not courage, but we make so courage. So today, a person who climbs the Everest, which seems that everybody wants to climb the Everest. They have a line to get to the Everest, and we think that that is courage. So that is distorted. It's distorted. That's not true courage. And then I brought some examples of this distortion that we made in courage. The first one here, it's the Maasai. So it's a tribe in Africa. And in order for the Maasai, for the boy to become a man, they have to kill a lion. They have to go after a lion and kill with that stick, with a spear. So it's an example of distorting the courage, and distorted by pride and selfishness. Are those people thinking about the pain that they're going to inflict on the animal? Why is the animal inferior? Why do I have to think that the animal doesn't, the life of a lion, it's less important than my life? Why do I have to kill a lion? A couple of years ago, there was a posting on Facebook of a guy that killed a bear with a spear, and he was boasting. We just came from Banff, so we know that bears, they avoid people. The most dangerous animal, according to the way science sees us as animals, we know that we are not animals in Spiritism, but in the general language, the most dangerous animal that kills more other animals is a human being. There's nothing compared, not great shark or bears. There's nothing that compares to us. So the bears, they move away. So then, of course, if I want to hunt a bear, I'm going to feel fear. Because I feel fear and I want to be courageous, I'm going to face that fear. That's an example of distorted courage. Why do I have to do that? Bear is a very big animal. To kill it with a spear, I have to stick it over and over and over again. You remember? Imagine the suffering. And an animal that wasn't even looking for trouble. That's I cannot talk too much about that. So this is an example of the distortion that we created in courage through the ages. So because of this pride and selfishness, that we don't think about the animal, and we do these foolish things just so that we can say we did it. Why would I ever climb Everest? To say I did it? Why? Pride is not useful for anybody. What use would that be? Some people say, I went there to feel alive. If you have to do that to feel alive, maybe you should change the concept of life, of living. So we see, so I see, if I'm doing these things, I see what I am, who I am, what I deserve, but I don't see what the person beside me is, who that person is, and what that person deserves. Because of selfishness. There's a very, if you want to test this, just take 401. Take your car and take 401. So, the roughness of the road and the way the tire is built, with the material of the tire, it forms a friction coefficient. So this friction coefficient, together with the angle and inclination of the curves, will give you a centripetal and centrifugal force. So this means that I'm at that speed, I can do a curve, and I'm not going to run away from the curve. I'm not going to create an accident. And with all that, they create a maximum speed limit. And they put a sign, 100 kilometers per hour. With all those calculations, safety for everybody. Have you tried to go at 100 kilometers per hour now for one? It's not very easy. Right? Everybody's angry at you. Everybody's angry at you. And then, if you have to go to the far right. Maybe even if you could ride out of the road, it would be even better. Because people want to kill you. So, and then okay, I'm gonna go at 120. But the problem is not your speed. The problem is you are on the way. Because the other person that's dressed, sometimes even us, sometimes we are that person. We don't think that in the other car there's a person, a driver, with the same rights that we have. No, we don't think that. We think it is in our way. And it doesn't matter if the guy is at 120, I want to go at 130. So this is an example of pride and selfishness applied in our daily lives. So, continuing. So we have the examples of the Maasai. Then we have the Spartans. The Spartans were a civilization built for courage, for warriors, pride and selfishness. Why? because since they were superior, everybody else was slaves. So they would take, since they were too good in order to do every other activity in a society, to cook or to rule or to do everything else. So they only wanted to fight and be prepared for war. That's all they wanted to do. So they would enslave other people to do the rest of the activities for them. And then in the end, and then in the very beginning, so their lives were based on this disease, on these viruses of violence. And since the beginning, they would be brought up, they would be raised under violence. And the thing is, this disease, because it is a disease, it's something that is not natural to us. We were created to love and to form families and to increase our family, to grow a family, not just by blood, a spiritual family. So that's what we were created by God. So when we take this disease of violence to its critical limit, we don't last long. As a civilization, we don't last long. So the Spartans, they came and went. And they left very little history. If we compare to their neighbors, Athens and the other cities who left us very rich history, very rich lessons that we still apply today. And then I have the last example, which is the Celts. It's still an example of distorted courage, because if you see at the back, there's the Roman Empire. So the thing is, since violence is not something natural, to us, it's a disease. But they wanted to be violent. They needed to create that violence to bring war. So first, they would all come to the battlefield drunk. They would drink a lot. It seems that when people drink, that's the trigger. It triggers violence in them, and that they all become very courageous. And they would create a war cry that was almost a hypnotism, because they have to excite their conscience to another level in order to produce such violence as war. As a human being, a normal state, even at that time, was too hard. We can't. This is too much against our nature. So they had to produce an ecstatic state in order for them to produce this war. So then we can say, yeah, but this was all back then. All back then. We don't have those problems anymore. We still bring, as I said, this violence. It's an old, lasting disease. It has been with us to this day. And we see soldiers that they go to Afghanistan or they go to war, and sadly, they never really come back. They never really come back. I don't mean that they discarnate there. They come in body, but their minds are still there. Why is that? Because they do something so unnatural for so long that something is snaps. We create a psychological, a mental disease, a mental disorder that sometimes it needs more than one incarnation to be solved, to be healed. So that is what I want to bring is there's something wrong there. This concept of courage has to be changed. That's not courage. If courage is a virtue and is something that we need to have, and this concept goes against the laws of God and creates so much pain, it's because it is wrong. All right, so what is right? It's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. This is an analogy. I don't mean that in the regenerative world we'll have lions and lambs together. It's a very interesting symbol. Why? Because we need to understand what is anger and why do we feel it. Why do we have that boost of energy? And understand that sometimes that it's completely out of place. What is under threat is our pride. It's nothing more than our pride. If you see, when we are angry, very angry, we bare our teeth. Why? There's no points here. It's all square teeth. Why do we do it? Because we used to have that were the teeth were our weapons. So we bear even in we were having a business meeting and people disagree and the discussion gets heated and you see people bearing their speaking under bare teeth, like they contract the lips, they contract the shoulders to protect the neck. So they are preparing for fight. And they expose their belly. Come and take a bite. So it's a body language. It's a body language that we don't even realize that we are doing. But that is it's coming from the animal. So that's a reaction, but that's not the age of reaction anymore. We are in the age of action. So we need to understand, why is that happening? Why am I under threat? Why am I feeling fear? And why am I attacking? Sometimes that person just disagrees with something, and I'm afraid that that person is going to expose my ignorance. But then I need to tell a secret. We are all ignorant. Just accept that. Just accept that. And start building in yourself humbleness. And then we start training. It's not from one day to the next. When we start training, when we feel that, we see there's no threat here. There's no reason to be afraid. So the courage at that point, it's inwards. It's inwards. It's the courage to admit that there's something wrong in yourself. That your pride, or you are too proud. And you need to fight against that to develop wisdom, humbleness. Or to go to the person and ask for forgiveness. Is that easy? Person that is very mad at you said something that you didn't like, but you said something back. And you go and you ask for forgiveness. That's courage. Because you are afraid of doing it. What would that person do? What would that person think? What would that person say? So you need courage to do that. But, in contrary to the courage that takes you to the top of the Everest, this courage is useful. It's useful. It's going to free you, and it's going to maybe conquer the other person. Maybe we're going to become friends. Which is according to the law of God. So it will be good. It will be good for everybody. And that's why I'm putting the lion and the lamb. Because courage is not just what is good for us. It's to make things for the good of everybody. Even that guy who is telling you things that you don't like. Even that person. 2,000 years ago, our planet entered a new phase with the coming of Jesus. A phase of the emotional and intellectual development. And one of the most important lessons that Jesus left from that change was love one another. There's no conditions. There's no conditions. Only love those who treat you well. No, there's no second part. love one another. And here we go, 20 centuries later, and we are still trying to learn this. So, if we instead of pride and selfishness, we purposefully start training ourselves to substitute that by humbleness and charity, we start understanding that angry people, or we even remember, when I was angry, was I happy? A person who is always angry on the traffic, or always angry in everything that they do, are they happy? No. They develop a lot of stress, a lot of diseases. And a person who is angry is not a happy person. It's a sick person. It's a sickness that is still with us. So then we start seeing that it is the lamb looking at the lion. That person it's sick. Maybe that person needs my help. How? How am I going to help someone that hates me? Well, we can start by forgiving that person. We don't feed the anger. Person tells us something. If we cannot say something back that would be helpful, we don't say anything. We keep your silence. Don't say anything. It's hard. In your mind, you're going, who is that person to say, to tell me that, this or that? The person is completely wrong. And then we start feeling, I want to say something back. But if you compare, when you start doing this in your life, you see situations where you do say something back and you start a confrontation argument, and then you remember another situation where you didn't. And then you compare, where did I feel better? In one situation, I will use the distorted concept of courage. I stand up for myself. I said something back. I fought the guy. And then you compare the other situation where you didn't say anything. And what do you feel? Oh, my pride is hurt. My pride is hurt. But then after a few days, you just forget about that. And when you compare, you see that in one situation, you are full of mental garbage that probably is going to follow you for the rest of your life. You said something to proposably hurt someone, or you did hurt with the first weapon that we ever learned how to use. And that carves a wound in our hearts, because it's against the law of God. Jesus even tells us that even a word, even an aggressive word, it's enough to make a wound in our soul, because it's against the law of God. It doesn't matter what the other person is saying. What matters is what we are doing. And when we compare those two situations, we see maybe it's better for us not to say anything. And then, when we decide to do that, we start learning. And finally, one day, we're going to be in the same situation, and we're going to learn to involve that person with our energy, our good energy. And we'll learn to make the person calm down and maybe hug you in the end. Isn't that what Jesus used to do? Paul of Tarsus. There's so many examples. I'll bring one example from this book. This is something that before I start, I invite everyone to stop at least a few moments and feel and understand everything that we were given. We are living in a situation today that never happened before in the history of our civilization. We were given the knowledge of how life is, after that. There's no veil. There's no metaphor. It's clear. It's clear. We study those books and we apply to our life and we feel the truth. We never had that before. It's a new time, a new age. And that is all because of hard work of a lot of people, a lot of spirits incarnate, discarnate. So we need to feel a little bit of gratitude for all that. Today I can take this book and read about a family or two families who were intertwined in several incarnations, and they end up together. So there's a lot of betrayal, there's death, there's pain, but they end up together. So then we don't see only by the optics of the material life, 80 years, 90 years. We see under the optics of the spirit, the immortal spirit, and we see how everything falls into place. And it's so pretty. This book is from André Luiz. Is still telling the story about André Luiz. But here, it's a different. This story takes place 15 years after Nosso Lar. 15 years after André Luiz has been accepted as a citizen of Nosso Lar. So it's a different André Luiz. It's a more experienced. And he is assigned to work with those two families. And those two families, one, the father, the head of one family is sleeping with the mother of the other family, and the same with the kids. It's a mess. It's a mess. And then when André Luiz gets there, I'm not going to tell all the details because it's a large book, but the whole book is one story, one mission. So then André Luiz goes, so first he visits the first family, then he goes to the second family. When he goes to the second family, he sees that the head of the family, father, is drinking whiskey. He's drinking alcohol. And together with him, there's a spirit who is so connected that they move at the same time. The spirit reaches for the glass, and the man reaches for the glass. At the same time, this perfect synchronism. An obsessor. And then the spirit, André Luiz is there. Of course, the spirit cannot see André Luiz, because once you develop yourself, you go to a different plane of existence. So the more mature spirits, they cannot see you if you are working for the good. So it's a natural barrier. So those who want to attack you, they won't be able to attack you because you are living in a different plane. There's no connection between the matter. They cannot even know that you are there. So then, André Luiz, he comes back, so he sees that, and then instead of judging that spirit and that head of the family, the head of that family, he had a daughter, and he does something so terrible to that daughter that that daughter wants to suicide. And eventually, she's not successful. She ends up drugged and is run over by a car. So she's all broken in the hospital. And the spirits, they make everything they can for her to not discarnate. Her body is completely destroyed. But they keep her there until her father comes. And he can repent. He can see his daughter and what happened to her because of him. So he can start from pain, he can start his process of learning. So André Luiz is seeing all that instead of judging, because the father was acting together with the obsessor. So André Luiz, he comes out of the apartment and he concentrates really hard, and then he makes his body really materialized, his spirit. Because he wants to know the obsessor. He wants to know what drives that obsessor. I want to talk to that guy. And he goes back to the apartment. This time he cannot just go through. He has to knock on the door. And then the obsessor answers. And then he starts talking to the obsessor, trying to gain the trust of the obsessor. And trying never going against the pride, but that spirit, the name is Moreira. He sees that, oh, this guy wants to do some good here in this apartment. I'm not going to allow. So he threatens André Luis with his fists. I'm going to punch you. And André Luis, he flees. And then we think, oh, but he didn't have courage. That's the distorted concept of courage. He came back the next day. So André Luis, he was not thinking in defending his pride. He was thinking in saving both families, not just defending himself. It's not selfishness. He wanted to work for the good of the whole family. So he came back in the next day, now without being materialized, and he worked and he worked and he worked and he worked. And this goes for several years. So there's a discarnation, incarnation, reincarnation. So several things happen. And the book ends with the two families now as one family at the beach, all together. Those who have died now reincarnated. Those who are still in the other plane, the spiritual plane, together there, sharing that moment, and those who are incarnated. All of them, not perfect, but all of them in the path of forgiveness and happiness as one big family. So this, it's when I read that, to me, this is what is true courage. Even with all those problems, André Luis and his supervisor Felix and the others who were helping, they fought really. So there were some of the spirits who were working the team that they were so angry with those incarnates that they wanted to punch them, really, with the violence. And okay, how can a spirit punch an incarnate guy? Well, not in the normal way, but he can make your muscles contract. He can create pain in your body. Spirits can do that, if you let them. If you are doing something really, really bad, probably you have your doors wide open. So they can come and they can create cramps in your body, they can create diseases. So they wanted to do that. But they held their judgment, and they worked and they worked and they worked against their pride, because those spirits were connected to that family. So something that those incarnates were doing were wounding the honor of those who were working in the spiritual plane, because they were all members of the same family. And they worked and they worked, and in the end they reached the goal. So it's a fight against your judgment, against your pride, against your selfishness. It's a courage that makes you humble against what we hear. So it doesn't matter what other people tell us, what we should do or what we are. We continue in the path that we think is the best, independent of other people think. So then I want to bring this. Our inheritance. Why am I bringing this? When Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek," the second part of the sentence was, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," or inherit the planet, or some translations, possess the planet. So then I ask, can I inherit something when the person or the previous owner is still around? So if I inherit something from my father, does it mean that my father is still alive? Is he still in this plane? Sometimes there are some exceptions, but normally it's when my parents discarnate, I inherit whatever they had. So when Jesus said that, he was looking far forward in the future. The meek, or the good, the ones who relinquish completely violence and their prides, they will inherit the earth. Okay, so if the meek will inherit, it means that the meek don't have the earth now. So who possess the earth now? The Spirit tells us that we live in an expiation world. It's predominantly evil. Predominantly evil. So this means that those who continue with this mindset of violence or being evil, they are not going to be here. In the next phase, they are not going to be here anymore. That's what it means. That's what Jesus was saying. And those who are meek they will inherit. So when I say that our inheritance, our planet, it's for any one of us who decides to develop this courage to change yourself. Because then we will inherit the earth. It's our home. And we know that this transition for another world, the next world that Jesus was talking about, has already started. How do we know that? There are several references, but how did it start? I'm going to read just a very small text. So this is from Saint Augustine. He said, when he was talking about progression of the worlds, the earth, according to that law, the law of progression, was once materially and morally in a state inferior to today. And under this dual aspect, it will reach a more elevated degree. It has arrived at one of its periods of transformation. It has arrived. This is 1860 something. In which, from being an expiatory world, it will become a regenerative one. Then humans will be happy because God's law will reign on it. So that's how we started. That's where our first clue in the 19th century. And then it came Emmanuel, came André Luiz, and more recently the book. It tells very clearly Planetary Transition, psychographed by Divaldo Franco from the Spirit, Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. So we are in this transformation. And that is, when we read another book that came after, when Kardec published all those books, and he discarnated, he left still other works that were never published. So then his friends, his family, they decide to make another book with posthumous works. So it is after his discarnation, so they published this book with the rest of the work that was never published. And one of these books, in this book, the posthumous work, in 1960 something, in 1860 something, the spirits say the moment of transition can be identified by two things: an increase in mental health issues and suicides.
And
That's how we're going to identify suicides. That's how we're going to identify when you are in transition. That was in the 19th century. And we see, 18th century. 19th century, 1860 something. So that's exactly what we see today. And more, something very interesting. Another book, this time from 1952. Emmanuel, in the book Roteiro, or Script, it tells us that more than 20 billions of conscious souls discarnated surround the terrestrial home, dwelling in another evolutionary state. So in 1952, we had 2.6 billion inhabitants in our world. And he's saying that there are 20 more surrounding. So now, what we are seeing, so that adds up to a total of 30, around 30 billion. So what happens is that today, we never had such an increase in the population. So it's, every couple of years, it grows by another billion, and another billion, and another billion. And then we think, oh, people are really not having any control. But the thing is, this is all planned. There is a saturation point. It's not that, in order for us to have a child, it needs to have an incarnate spirit. And we know from the books of André Luiz that there is a department that takes care of that. It's a whole department, reincarnation department. So it's not something random. It's planned. So why is it that we see so many people? Because we all need the chance to live in the period that we're living now. Everything is changing. After it changes, only the meek will be allowed to inherit the earth. What's going to happen to those who are not meek? Those who will still continue with the virus of violence or the distorted concept of courage. They will continue learning. They will continue. Of course, they're still children of God. They will continue. But not here. Not here. Somewhere else in the universe. So I want to close with this picture. To say that when we understand what is the true concept of courage now, and we don't have to go through all this alone. We don't have to. We have to have courage, but we're never going to be alone. When we need it, God is going to send someone, not something, someone. Someone, because that's our nature. This is our world, our home, and we'll all make it better all together. So that's our nature, to become a very large family. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafa. So we have a couple minutes if anyone have any questions, any comment. Anyone online too, please? No? No? All right. So we'll get ready for our passes. Thank you very much, Rafa. Thank you for those who join us online. We'll get ready for the passes, so we invite you to do a prayer at your place. Thank you.